Tamara Blackwell is 41 years old. She lives in Bel Air, Kansas, a suburb of Wichita, and she has what I would call an extremely good singing voice.
In the name of Jesus.
This is from a TikTok she made, wearing a Kansas City Chiefs t-shirt. Tamara's passionate about a lot of things. Sports, fashion, her faith. But what she talks about the most on TikTok is disability advocacy.
I'm a lot of things, but right now I carry the title of Miss Wheelchair America.
At first, she was Miss Wheelchair Kansas. Then in 2024, she beat out all the other state title holders at nationals. She talks about a lot of things online. Misconceptions about disabilities, how she navigates the world as a wheelchair user with muscular dystrophy, and sometimes legislation that could majorly impact her community.
So I just got home and I seen that the results are in and that the House had approved a spending bill.
There's sort of been a lot of that lately.
Lawmakers have been up all night debating President Trump's massive budget bill.
Medicaid keeps getting more popular. At the same time, Republicans aim to cut federal spending on the health insurance program by $800 billion.
I did become discouraged at the beginning of this year, and I did not want to be Miss Wheelchair America at the beginning of this year.
I talked to Tamara in June as she was preparing for a trip to Capitol Hill.
So we'll be going to speak with congressional leaders and legislators. Our biggest thing on our agenda is Medicaid, the cuts to Medicaid.
Congress ended up passing those Medicaid cuts, along with a lot of other changes. And I'm not going to lie, there are a ton of advocates out there right now who are feeling really dejected. But at times like this, it can sometimes help to look into the past and remind ourselves exactly how progress gets made in the first place.
I always have to laugh and say the best part of losing funding for programs is that that's the time that it's the easiest to bring people together and get people fired up. It's when you lose your rights that you get excited.
This is A People's History of Kansas City. I'm Mackenzie Martin, and 35 years ago this month, President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This historic act is the world's first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities.
The landmark federal civil rights law prohibited discrimination in schools, workplaces, and transportation. The ADA is ingrained in how America builds buildings and does business. But most people probably don't realize how much work went into getting this law passed.
Access is a civil right!
Years of debates between politicians and advocates. Not to mention protests, lobbying, and backdoor negotiations. It got messy.
People pulling their bodies up the steps to demonstrate the spectacle of inaccessibility. This is what this looks like. If this is uncomfortable to you, it should be.
Don't underestimate the power of collective advocacy.
No.
The ADA didn't pass because the system was ready. It passed because people demanded it.
Passing the Americans with Disabilities Act took advocates and grassroots organizers from across the country. But of all the states, Kansas played a much bigger part than some, because Kansas is the home of U.S. Senator Bob Dole.
Tonight I stand before you, tested by adversity, made sensitive by hardship, a fighter by principle, and the most optimistic man in America.
The late Republican senator was absolutely essential to the ADA's passage. Dole represented the state of Kansas for 35 years in Congress, but he really, really wanted to be president. He ran 3 times, in fact. He lost in primaries to Ronald Reagan in 1980 and George H.W. Bush in 1988. In 1996, he won the Republican national nomination, only to lose in the general election to Bill Clinton. He was perceived at times as being tough and stubborn, a stern negotiator. Often, Dole talked about himself in the third person.
Bob Dole is a doer, not a talker.
But he was also incredibly witty, quick with the one-liners, the kind of guy who knew how to take a joke. Here he is on SNL with comedian Norm Macdonald.
You're really doing an impression of Dan Aykroyd when he does an impression of me. You know it, and I know it, and the American people know it.
Now, come on now, Senator. It's a great impression. Listen to this. Come November 5th, a lot of people are going to be surprised by Bob Dole because Bob Dole is going to win this election.
Doesn't sound a thing like me. First of all, I don't run around saying Bob Dole does this and Bob Dole does that. That's not something Bob Dole does.
Sometimes it feels like Bob Dole was a contradiction. Like, on one hand, he was unquestionably loyal to the Republican Party. In 2016, he endorsed President Donald Trump, the only former Republican presidential nominee to do so. However, he was also famous for his ability to work across the aisle. He teamed up with Democrats to reform the federal food stamp program and protect Social Security. Dole believed in the power of teamwork to make people's lives better, and he credited that value to where he grew up, Russell, Kansas, a tiny city of less than 5,000 people, about 2.5 hours west of Topeka. He was kind of their golden boy.
My primary interest was how fast I could run and what I could do on the basketball court.
6'2", strong, good-looking, a basketball star recruited to the University of Kansas by the famous coach Phog Allen. But he didn't stay at KU very long. He left to fight World War II, and it nearly killed him. It was 3 weeks before the end of the war in Europe when Dole's platoon got caught in a firefight in Italy. Shrapnel blew apart his shoulder and arm and broke several vertebrae in his neck and spine. For a time, he was paralyzed from the neck down. It was a miracle he escaped alive. For years, Dole was in and out of hospitals, bedridden for long periods of time. He used to play this song, "You'll Never Walk Alone," over and over again while he was recovering. And the people of Russell made sure he wasn't alone. They established the Bob Dole Fund and raised money for his surgeries by putting out a cigar box at the local drugstore. The same drugstore where Dole used to serve ice cream floats as a teenager. Dole never fully regained the use of his right arm, but with everyone's support, he got healthier. And it marked a major turning point in his life. Here he is in 2005, being interviewed by Terry Gross.
Do you think you would have gone into politics if you weren't injured in the war? Do you think your life might have taken a completely different direction?
I think so. I've wondered about that a lot. I used to say if I can't use my hands, I'll use my head and go to law school and do whatever you do with a law degree.
Dole was elected to the Kansas House of Representatives in 1950, while he was still a student at Washburn Law School. And in 1960, the city of Russell helped send him to the U.S. House.
This is Congressman Bob Dole with my weekly radio report from Washington.
He used to say, Dole, like the pineapple juice, even though he had absolutely no connection to the fruit company that shared his name.
There is a man in Washington, D.C.
He became known as a hardline fiscal conservative, but he also supported the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Bob Dole is his name.
4 terms later, he was elected to the U.S. Senate.
Who serves both you and me.
He became a household name in 1976 when President Gerald Ford chose Dole as his running mate. Right away, Dole did things differently. He had his speech at the Republican National Convention interpreted into sign language. A controversial move, apparently.
There were some saying, don't do that. It's going to interfere with others who want to watch television. Well, I don't feel that way. I feel that I'm a part of this great community of some 30 million Americans. I think we ought to communicate with all the American people and not shut part of them out.
The convention was held in Kansas City that year. And afterwards, Dole celebrated with a rally of 10,000 of his closest friends in his beloved hometown.
If I've done anything, it's because of people I've known up and down Main Street, and I can recall the time when I needed help, the people of Russell helped. And I think...
It's hard to hear, but Dole completely breaks down at the microphone. This is how much Russell meant to him.
He never forgot that he came from humble beginnings, that he grew up poor, that members of his family were on welfare, that his family were Democrats.
This is Mary Lahosky. She started working for Dole that same year, 1976. Originally, she was in the mailroom, but then, one day, a legislative assistant left. Who was going to staff those bills and go to that hearing and report back to the senator?
I just started doing the job. And then it was mine. And then I got the little business cards that said Mary Wheat, legislative assistant.
Mary was responsible for helping advise the senator on disability issues, among other things.
Things that didn't fit into other neat packages.
And it wasn't an easy job. Mary says there were a lot of competing interests.
Not only was it the blind lobby groups and the deaf, but within the blind, there were two major lobbying groups, and they competed with each other.
Bob Dole firmly established himself as a voice for people with disabilities. He made his first speech on the Senate floor in 1969, on the 24th anniversary of the day he was wounded in World War II.
And I said at that time, handicapped people, they've always suffered from discrimination and exclusion. It may not be a problem of being excluded from the front of the bus, but as often as a problem of being excluded from even getting on the bus. If there's a foot and a half curb, you might as well be in China. You're just that far away. And we're making some progress, but it's very slow.
He called for closed captioning in U.S. Senate proceedings and authored a law that prohibited airlines from discriminating against people with disabilities.
It was who he was. I mean, certainly, if you were going to choose a topic to gain you credibility and notoriety, in that day and age, you would not have chosen disability rights.
During his first Senate term, Dole also supported the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And if you've never heard of the Rehab Act, it's super important you pay attention to this next part, because that's what laid the groundwork for the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically a tiny part of the bill called Section 504.
So Section 504 is the very beginning of the notion of civil rights for disabled people.
Rebecca Tossig is a writer in Kansas City and a wheelchair user.
It's like a little piece of legislation that's less than 50 words long. And it was kind of snuck into that Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and nobody really paid attention to it.
Section 504 prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities for all programs receiving federal funds. Basically, it forced places like hospitals and universities to remove obstacles. Dole called it one of the greatest civil rights statutes ever enacted. And Dole's support of the bill made him clash with a loyal friend, President Richard Nixon. Nixon vetoed the Rehab Act twice before finally signing it in 1973. But here's the kicker that drove a lot of people crazy. Section 504 was never fully enforced by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, largely because of businesses and other organizations arguing that it was burdensome and unfair. So disability advocates started insisting that you develop and implement some real regulations so that Section 504 would have some teeth and actually mean something.
Section 504 is a Bill of Rights for America's handicapped.
This is Dole giving a speech in 1976.
Department of Health, Education, and Welfare is in the final stages of a wide-ranging public review the regulations implementing Section 504. And President Ford and I believe, and strongly believe, that should be completed as quickly as possible.
Finally, in 1977 is when there was this huge protest. It started as rallies in 9 different cities across the country.
D.C., Atlanta, Chicago, Denver.
And then a few of the rallies turned into storming the building.
The biggest one was in San Francisco.
Immediately after that demonstration this morning, the handicapped started invading the building. It's the old federal building, which is now the HEW headquarters.
It was a lot of hippies, they were just the scrappiest underdogs ever.
It is nearing 2 weeks now since 150 handicapped people moved into the HEW offices. And it was today, in response to that occupation, that a special congressional hearing convened.
We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals.
This is 29-year-old Judy Heumann. People call her the mother of the disability rights movement.
And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
There was no even conception of disability rights. It wasn't this place isn't accessible, but it should be because I deserve to be here. That was a story that didn't really exist the way that it does now. All of these disabled protesters and leaders came together and kind of insisted together that the world should be built with them in mind.
Finally, the Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare signed the Section 504 regulations and agreed to enforce them nationwide. Senator Dole wasn't one to stand up and protest. He liked to do things in the proper channels. But in 1977, a month after the sit-in, Dole helped organize the first White House conference on handicapped individuals.
We can remove architectural barriers. We make it possible to get in with your wheelchair. But there's still an attitude out there. We're sort of a minority group that we've sort of been pushed in the background, and we're coming to the front. Legislation's making it possible.
Dole's work at this time was a big inspiration to guys like John Kemp.
I love Bob Dole.
Later, John and Dole teamed up to found the American Association of People with Disabilities. But back in 1977, John was just a 27-year-old lawyer in Kansas City, watching all of this unfolding on TV. Absolutely electric with excitement.
That's how humble and extraordinary he was. And that's not an easy combination to put together because most politicians are so full of themselves they can't get out of their way.
John testified in Congress for the passage of the Rehab Act. So he was thrilled to hear that Section 504 was finally going to be enforced. It had been a long time coming. See, John was born without arms or legs, which means he uses 4 prostheses. And when he was growing up, a lot of people with disabilities lived isolated lives without access to public spaces or formal education. John saw it firsthand when he was picked as the poster child for the Easter Seals charity. The Disability Services nonprofit sent him all around the country.
There are no more poster children for charities, and then that's a good thing.
But what John enjoyed about that gig was getting to advocate on behalf of fellow kids with disabilities.
It was probably one of the best years of my life, traveling to New York on the Today Show, to California. At 10, I was a little older than the average poster child, so they would let me say a few words, and I had a kind of a canned 4-sentence speech.
A classic early indicator of a lawyer to be. When Section 504 was implemented, though, John says businesses sort of freaked out.
Because people didn't know what this meant. Who is a person with a disability? What is the definition of a disability? What's reasonable accommodation?
So John and a friend set up a consulting firm in the Kansas City area to help companies comply, to show them how to make their buildings, retail services, and employment opportunities more accessible.
We flew out of KCI like every week. We were flying somewhere in the country.
Of course, the huge limitation of Section 504 was that it only applied to institutions that received federal funding. And advocates like John Kemp and Senator Dole wanted accommodations in the private sector, too. That's one of the things the Americans with Disabilities Act was written to solve. My favorite thing about the ADA is that it wasn't written by one person. It was this culmination of efforts by thousands of people. One of the guys who spearheaded it was Justin Dart. He's a polio survivor and wheelchair user. And he always wore a cowboy hat with a little American flag pin, only the stars were in the shape of a wheelchair. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan appointed Justin Dart and others to the National Council on Disability. And Dart says they became a bit of a headache for the Reagan administration.
Why do you say that?
Well, we wrote the ADA, and we were smart enough not to tell the White House we were doing it until it was published.
It's true. The National Council on Disability published a groundbreaking report in 1986 and used it to draft the ADA in January 1988, 3 months before any lawmaker introduced it into Congress. Dart says people immediately told them to strip all that civil rights stuff out of there.
Instead of offering to take it out, we said, we're going to present this civil rights law, and I really don't think that President Reagan wants to go down as the president who opposed extending the Declaration of Independence to people with disabilities.
As federal lawmakers began debating the ADA, Justin Dart came to Kansas City on a cross-country road trip. And during an hour-long forum, he asked people with disabilities what challenges they faced. The Kansas City Times says witnesses aired their complaints as if cleansing wounds. A woman with a spinal cord injury spoke up about the humiliating time a local restaurant refused to host her birthday party. A woman with epilepsy shared that a bus driver once ordered her to get off the bus for fear she might have a seizure. A man in crutches complained that because of his disability, he was told to enter a restaurant using the back door. These are the kinds of everyday injustices that the ADA promised to protect people from. Maureen West was working on Capitol Hill back then, though she's better known as Mo West.
When I hear Maureen, I think I'm in trouble because it's just so foreign to me.
Mo grew up in Iowa and first got involved with the Senate Subcommittee on Disability Policy as a summer intern. But she loved it so much that she went straight back after she graduated from nursing school.
Because I was so enamored with the social change that emanated with progressive policies. You know, we're in the front lines of healthcare and we're advocates for health equity and access.
Mo was Senator Dole's legislative aide when he signed on as a sponsor of the ADA, and they became good friends right away. But it was a little intimidating. At the time, Dole was the Senate Minority Leader, you know, the top Republican in the chamber.
He had meetings all day long with very important people in the White House and, you know, foreign leaders. And I would be like, could I get, you know, some time with you to talk about what's going on in Kansas with the disability rights advocates? And he was just wonderful. He always gave me as much time as I needed.
Mo's job was to basically have her pulse on the ADA. What was going on? What people were saying? What was holding it up? She remembers how Kansas advocates would put the pressure on Dole.
They'd be saying, this is what we're hearing and we're not happy.
One of those people was Gina McDonald, an organizer from Salina in her late 30s.
I think it's really important to get people in touch with their, not just their anger, but their passion and what's really important to them and how things are going to affect them directly.
This is Gina being interviewed in 2002.
How do you get the various groups, the screamers, the negotiators, to actually respect each other through this process?
I don't know, and if you find the answer to that, please tell me.
In the 90s, Gina was the director of the Kansas Association for Centers of Independent Living, aka CASEL. But there were a lot of other disability rights groups out there too, and some, like the group ADAPT, were more outspoken in their messaging. And Gina would sort of use that contrast to her advantage.
Many times CASEL and ADAPT play good cop, bad cop. Many times I'll go to a legislator and I'm working with them on negotiation and I'll say, well, you know, you can either work with me or, you know, those ADAPT people are going to be up here and I can't stop them. I don't know. You know, so either we can figure out how to solve it or they're going to be here.
I think it's important you hear all of these different viewpoints so you get a feel for how messy all of this was and how many different directions lawmakers like Dole were being pulled in. Like with any civil rights cause, the disability rights movement saw different levels of radicalism, putting pressure on people to find a compromise. And Dole was in the middle of all of it. Senator Tom Harkin was a Democrat from Iowa who helped introduce the ADA. And he called Dole their linchpin to the Republicans. Here's John Kemp again.
He would meet with the president on the ADA as it was being drafted. And they would say, gosh, I don't know if we can do that, and I don't know if we can do that.
Once again, one of the biggest points of contention here were businesses. I mean, putting in accessible ramps and other building accommodations, that was going to cost some serious money. But Dole would frame the ADA as good for the economy overall. I mean, didn't we want more people participating in the workforce?
There were real tensions. And the thing about Senator Dole is that he was willing to listen and kind of massage some of the changes that needed to be made, but he didn't do it right away.
Bob Dole was an excellent compromiser, but he wanted something left. He didn't want to give it all away and compromise it down to a meaningless piece of legislation.
Everything came to a head in March 1990. The ADA had passed the Senate, but it was stalled in the House. And the activists had run out of patience.
Access is a civil right!
Don't underestimate the power of collective advocacy. The ADA didn't pass because the system was ready. It passed because people demanded it.
Okay, it's March 1990, almost 2 years since the Americans with Disabilities Act was first introduced, and it is still being debated in the U.S. House of Representatives. And activists are sick of waiting around, just like they were 13 years ago with Section 504. So ADAPT and other organizers plan a bunch of demonstrations, including a now famous march, to put the pressure on Congress.
It has been called a Bill of Rights for 43 million people, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And later today in Washington, its supporters will march from the White House to Capitol Hill.
Senator Dole wasn't at the protests, but he was helping raise awareness and support for the ADA in other ways that day.
And joining us now in Washington is Senator Robert Dole. He is the Senate Minority Leader, and he is a co-sponsor of the legislation. Now, this has been called, an Emancipation Proclamation for the Disabled. Is that hyperbole?
I think it's really true. I think it is an emancipation. We're the largest and probably the poorest group that's not protected by civil rights protection.
I took part in the march from the White House.
This is Mo West from Senator Dole's office again.
And I had his full blessing to do that.
We are here to demand that the House of Representatives vote now.
Hundreds marched that day, but it didn't stop there. At the Capitol steps, 60 disability rights activists abandoned their wheelchairs, crutches, and other mobility aids, and slowly, painstakingly, climbed up however they could.
Come on, let's crawl!
The youngest activist to climb the steps was just 8 years old.
I'll take all night if I have to. All right!
I think it was like 83 steps or something like that.
This is Kansas City writer Rebecca Tossig again.
The 1990 Capitol crawl, the images of that are iconic.
No.
Like you have the Capitol towering and then these people pulling their bodies up the steps to demonstrate the spectacle of inaccessibility. This is what this looks like. If this is uncomfortable to you, it should be.
It wasn't just a protest, it was like a turning point.
The next day, 200 advocates occupied the Capitol's rotunda. And over 100 were arrested.
They weren't going to move until they got a commitment that this bill would continue to move in the House.
Finally,
legislators that were involved in the ADA came over and said, we're going to move this. We hear you. We see you. This is really important. And it did. It was a huge impetus to get the bill passed.
And on July 26, 1990, thousands of disabled people and advocates showed up to the White House to watch President George H.W. Bush sign the world's first comprehensive civil rights law for people with disabilities.
This is an immensely important day, a day that belongs to all of you. And everywhere I look, I see people who have dedicated themselves to making sure that this day would come to pass.
A lot of the people you've been hearing from were there. National advocates like Judy Heumann and Justin Dart, Senator Dole, Mo West, John Kemp.
It was a really hot, bright, sunny day. Everybody was just so happy that we had taken such a big step forward for a huge number of people with disabilities.
Bob Dole was the sixth person that President Bush thanked.
I can say on a very personal basis, Bob Dole has inspired me.
Bob Dole called the ADA his proudest legislative accomplishment. And he went on to champion disability rights until he died in 2021 at the age of 98. Part of his legacy included supporting initiatives like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which took its inspiration from the ADA. It's since been ratified by nearly every country in the world. And thanks to the ADA, we now have a generation of people who grew up in a completely different world. A world with closed captions on television and crosswalk signs that tell you when it's safe to go.
Wait.
And disability parking permits and accessible bathroom stalls.
I'm so curious what people even know about the ADA.
Rebecca Tossig was 4 years old when the ADA became law. And she uses a wheelchair, so she benefits from a lot of its policies. But even she says it's easy to take it for granted.
All of these things that are just kind of a part of a lot of our lived world now. I don't know how many people think of them.
Even if you don't think you benefit from the ADA, you definitely do. Take something like a curb cut, that ramped section of a sidewalk. It's great for wheelchair users, of course, but it's also great for someone pushing a stroller or using a walker or rolling a suitcase or riding a bike. These days, more designers are following this concept known as universal design, which creates environments that are usable by all people. Rebecca can see its influence in places like the new Kansas City airport.
It just feels like they're thinking about the real humans occupying that space
Of course, in historical cities, there are still a lot of hurdles that the ADA can't fix. Like shopping for accessible houses in Kansas City? Extremely hard. Rebecca's learned that she can't be picky about specific neighborhoods or how well maintained a house has been. Though she did get really lucky recently.
We chose this house because the woman who lived in this house before us had already built ramps for her aging dog. I mean, it's like a unicorn of a house that we found.
These are the kinds of everyday moments Rebecca chronicled in her memoir, Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body. She also has a children's book called We Are the Scrappy Ones, and she co-hosts a parenting podcast called Scratch That. Rebecca says she writes to understand and reclaim our cultural narratives around disability and motherhood. And what she thinks a lot of people miss about disability is that it's this ever-fluctuating identity.
We're all kind of moving in and out of disabling experiences. I mean, I'm experiencing that with my own parents now.
She says if we're lucky to live long enough, all of us will experience a disability at one point, whether that's tearing our ACL, needing glasses, or hearing aids, or pregnancy. No one can be able-bodied forever, which is why, she says, when we mock and shame and abandon the ones we perceive on the outside, we're actually mocking and shaming and abandoning ourselves. Remember Judy Heumann from the 504 sit-in?
We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals.
Apple TV is making a movie based on her memoir, and Rebecca co-wrote the script. And it's legit. The project is being directed by Sean Hayter, who won an Oscar for the film Coda. And all of this means Rebecca's been seeping in the stories of these disability activists for a while now, which is why it crushed her when she found out about a recent lawsuit. Attorneys general in 17 states, including Kansas and Missouri, sued the U.S. government in 2024. They wanted to invalidate Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and declare it unconstitutional. And if that happened, well, it would be profoundly disruptive to the protections people with disabilities have. And it could also undermine laws like the ADA. Immediately, Rebecca knew she had to say something.
I wanted people to know what it was, why it was important, and what it would mean to take it away.
So she wrote an article for Time magazine in February titled, "A Lawsuit Threatens the Disability Protections I've Known My Whole Life." And she wasn't the only one.
Welcome, everyone. You are in a community briefing about the attack on Section 504 and what you can do to stop it.
Parents were livid, furious at the idea that you're going to take that away from my kid. No.
This does not only affect people with disabilities, this affects everyone, and I need you to listen to me. This is no longer about left or right. I don't care who you voted for at this point. We all are stronger together.
And as a result of this public outcry, something actually happened. The states dropped the part of the lawsuit that sought to make Section 504 unconstitutional. Don't get me wrong, threats very much still remain. But that loud, sweeping outcry against the lawsuit and the way the attorneys general retreated, well, that brings Rebecca a tiny bit of hope. It's a reminder that our collective voices do matter, even as she watches the government roll back programs and funding for people with disabilities. Because 35 years after the ADA, more than just the built world has changed.
That belief that they put into that world, that story that they put into the world has changed at least a couple generations of kids now who will show up to a movie theater or a restaurant or a school and just have something deep inside that says, like, I belong here. And if somebody tries to, like, push me out, there is something that will kick up in me that says that's not right.
Thanks for listening to A People's History of Kansas City. This episode was reported, produced, and mixed by me, Mackenzie Martin. It was edited by Suzanne Hogan and Gabe Rosenberg. Huge thanks this episode to the Robert J. Dole Institute of Politics. They have an incredible collection of archival audio and more. Definitely head over to Lawrence and check it out. Additional audio is courtesy of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, Western New York Independent Living, and the University of Texas at Arlington. Plus, NPR, NBC, WHYY, BBC, CBS, the U.S. National Archives, Frank Sinatra, and Blue Dot Sessions. We are a production of KCUR Studios, a podcast network in Kansas City, Missouri. And we'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. You can find us on Instagram at KC People's History. I also want to say thank you so much to everyone who has been supporting the show lately at kcur.org/support. We seriously could not do this without you. Okay, we'll be back next month with another episode about everyday heroes and underdogs.